I'm not used to seeing those films in such non-powerful ways. The last one, of course, I've only seen a few times, and that's very recently, but it's, the resonances and the contrasts, are very interesting, I think, in this way of curating these films. And so, how you are experiencing them yourself, going from folk blues or folk film, I realize that there are echoes in the following film, your television travel. But just thinking, I'm wondering about how it is for you to see these in this way.
This last film was not one that I considered blues my first real film. But other people who have seen it should. And actually, I'm very proud of it. It represents something that could have gone in this direction. I had just gotten the camera and was looking for things to do with it. And so one of the things, somehow this was the first group of Black and Latin students at the college. Amazingly, Northern now, its majority is different minority groups. And these were brought into a special program, and somehow I became friends with them. And I'm still friends with some of them. One of them, the guy that you see, a Hispanic guy, is the chairman of the Hispanic department at Duke University, something like that. I'm not sure. One of the other guys is a playwright, and they have these different anniversaries of 50 years program, 50 years of the African Studies program, and they invited me. And I'm kind of proud of it, actually. But there's something about documentary. I could have gone in a certain direction at the beginning, and somehow, of course, I began to know people. My friends were already, like Irving and Alice and so on, and were already established somewhat in the world of experimental cinema, and I was already interested, even at this time, in the Warhol films, what was going on in at that time, not only in film, but in dance and music, and sculpture, and everything. But there is an interest that I have in a kind of anti-documentary. I mean, Your Television Traveler is an example of that. I made these films in the Dominican Republic and Haiti that had material that could have been documentary material. And so I began to be interested in anti-documentary and even anti-truth, even to best intention things, like in the film MoMA. The fact that it's nice in a way, and it's very well intentioned, and I believe in and proud to let them, they felt that they could open up with me. But the film itself, the structure of the film itself, goes against it. Something is wrong with it. Something that was really a very great thing for me was, believe it or not, there was this Taiwan International Documentary Film Festival that I couldn't go to because of COVID. But the emblem of this international documentary film was blues. Believe it or not, the program, even the tickets had a still from blues in it, in this documentary film, and I didn't suggest it. They suggested it. And I felt that that was an insight into something that even now I can't articulate it, but they felt something. I mean, blues. Okay, I'll go on a little bit, maybe, but something that's most important to me is the visceral experience of being in the zone of the film and being absorbed in it and paying attention to it. And to be in a group of people who are doing that is very thrilling. And when you watch it, or when I watch it, I'm glued to the physical, the things that are happening in it, the sounds, the relationship with the sounds in it. I'm not thinking about what does this mean? But then, what does it mean? I mean, like in harmonica, you know, okay, there's space, there's the window is closed, but there's the plane of the window, and it's going outside of that into this landscape, and then in the end, he's like almost like a tribal drumming. It gets really crazy, really wild. What does it mean? I mean, it's not an essay, but it's not just an entertainment either. It's something that's in there. There's something that's in blues and in all my films that I feel the presence of, and I hope that as an audience you could feel the presence of it, and then later you could think about it. I mean, when you're watching it, I don't think that you're seeing it as a lesson about something. It's something else. I mean, maybe that's what cinema is.
I want to say one thing about the last film, which I find very, first of all, amazing time capsule, and everything about it is right on of that period for me, including the nature of the black and white and many things, obviously dialogue, but and I think that it's very sensitively made, and actually I think, you know, these empathy and the issues of the late 60s, you know, is very, I think, very strong. But I think that the film before it, The Masani, Mother of Muses, which is actually one of my favorite films, is an, you know, it's an extraordinary piece in so many ways. And the contrast between them is very telling. Obviously, they're night and day different. But I think that The Masani was a film which was kind of a peak. You know, even the transition at that point, it was really much a peak of everything you've learned until then about filmmaking, but in this different way of dealing with film and cinema. And I just think that it's very, this doesn't put down the last film. It's easy to understand why you're doing that direction. You know, anybody who knows you realizes that you're so full of ideas, knowledge, just the way you were speaking a minute ago about, you know, how you enter and you know, basically embody yourself in the work. And these are works you made them countless times. So anyway, I just think it's an interesting, talk about contrast. I think it's a very interesting realization, actually. But I also will say that I think I'm glad that you're accepting the film.
When I was still in the English department, the first person that I invited to meet to was Shirley Clark. I had seen Portrait of Jason, and that's really impressed me. And so I contacted her, and she came with a suitcase of films from the co-op at that time. And it was like, she was very generous. She looked at, you know, doing something else, and she looked at my stuff and said, I think that she was really great.
The screening of Portrait of Jason, which was in the theater, I remember after that, a student was so overwhelmed by it, and he actually said, to her, you know, you're a hack. And he said, how could you do this to this poor guy? And it was a stunning moment. I haven't forgotten it. But, you know, and that was the first time, it was soon after the film was made. But I mean, on top of the fact that it's not true, but I think that the student was so overwhelmed, I don't think he knew that was wrong. That was a time when so much was powerful and ended in so many ways.
Right around that time, besides all the stuff that was going on in New York and the world, there was also the early films, Antonioni, Godard, so it was heavy to be influenced in different directions, by the really edgy avant-garde, sculpture, dance, things, and yet seeing these films, I remember being so struck by the early, what's his name? Swedish, Bergman. Now I hate those films. It makes me sick. so exciting. Something can be so emotionally registering.
Can I ask you something in terms of blues? Something I haven't forgotten from the book that you write, in your writing, is that you say that in a way all of your work subsequently derives from blues. And I mean, that's a big subject, but I just wonder what it quotes to mind. I mean, it's very interesting, and Larry's discussion in the book of blues, I think, is a very moving and very revealing.
My concern a lot, believe it or not, is very simple. I mean, for example, in that film, I had access to a special 8mm camera that was run by MoMA, and I had read somewhere, I was just learning about f-stops and stuff. But I read that if you put a lens on a camera that was meant for a different size film, it would double the focal length. So that's a known thing by anybody who uses a 35mm camera. But because this was an 8mm camera, but you could put on a Bolex lens. I remember I said, what if I put on the most distant, long focal length lens? So I put it on the lens and I grabbed something. My wife was a potter and ceramic artist, so we were surrounded by pottery. I can't explain why I thought of blueberries and milk, because as a kid, you would have blueberries and sour cream, or anywhere it came out, and I put the thing down and put the camera, and it was like, it was so magnified that it almost was not even a measurable image. So I went farther away and farther away, and then I went up to the second floor of the house and looked down, and so that it's actually on a hill angle. But one of the amazing things that happened in it is because it's on a hill a little bit, and the milk is giving more space to the berries, there's a couple of moments where they slide down. But I wasn't, obviously I couldn't intend for that to happen, but I was concerned also with harmonica. I was concerned with where am I with the camera, and how is it going to work, and so on. So it was these practical things I was working on, and the things that made up it, like why did I decide to make that film? And almost I didn't even think about it. I mean, he was a friend. He did it once. We were riding in the car, and he stuck a harmonica out of the window, and I said, oh, that would be such a wonderful thing to make a film. And then I thought of these practical things: what lens, where was I? How I didn't give him very many instructions. But then now it exists, and it has some kind of power in it where it can generate thoughts. Even now, I'm seeing some of these things in the early actual 60mm prints and not digital versions, and you see it differently. Like in blues, the whiteness of the milk is so strong. It's almost like unbelievably intense light. And so I'm going to say this, when I see it now, is what happens is that as the blueberries are removed, what actually is happening is the white is revealing more and more of itself. And so finally, there it is alone. And all those things, what is it when one berry is there? It was actually a little bit out of frame. It should be centered in the image. But what I'm thinking of, what does it mean? I mean, even now, I'm struggling. When I see it, I'm thinking like, holy shit, this is really powerful. I don't know what it means. One of the things I said from looking back on it from a later vantage point is it has something to do with counting. That when you first see it, there's a mass of blueberries. How many? who knows how many, it's a lot of them. But when it gets to be a few, you see, wow, there's three, there's one. I mean, it starts to be counting. And I'm thinking, what is the nature of counting? I mean, this is a film about counting. And I have another film, Not, which has something to do with counting. And then I remembered something in my life studying literature with my areas of greatest interest was Dostoevsky. And in Notes from the Underground man says that 2 times 2 is 4 is wrong. It's much more correct to say 2 times 2 is 5, because it opens up something. Like 2 times 4 doesn't open up anything. You know, you're just learning with the teacher, you know, yelling at you until you learn 2 times 2 is 4. And then there's the harder ones, like what's 3 times 1, what is counting? And then I'm thinking lately, this is philosophical, so that I could say that the films are a little bit philosophical, but they weren't made as philosophical works. But something is clearly going wrong with the human race. And how did that happen? What went wrong? We were thinking about, like, I don't want to get into the lecture thing because these films were not like that. But, you know, the Weimar Republic led to the Nazis and all that stuff.
They're respites, in a way, right? Yeah. Speaking of Nazis, one of the pieces that Larry will show later, the recent digital deals with the great conductor Furtwängler, and it's quite a complex piece, actually.
There's a conductor in this film because obviously one of the things is my father had a stroke, and I'm thinking about my father, and so one of the real life elements was trying to deal with my father at the end of his life, having this stroke. But I felt I had a lot of problems about my father that are present in the film, so that when I was in high school, I went to a high school music and art in the city as a music student, and my idol was Toscanini. And so Toscanini is the person who's singing along, and you know, so he represented something like a kind of like Dostoevsky, Toscanini, great artists, represented my fantasy father as opposed to my real father. But in the film, Toscanini is also a fearsome, he's screaming at the orchestra. There's something really intensely wrong with him, as well as being, you know, so this idea of the conductor has a lot of ramifications in this film and in later films.
Back to what you said about, talking about harmonica, and also having been, I guess, inspired by the Warhol films. It's interesting, I was thinking about it the other day, that each one of your silent early films and harmonica are quite a contrast with the Warhol films, because every one of them deals with, you know, the rural geography and a very different mindset, obviously, than in the Warhol films. You know, most of them are their own color, and aside from that, it's really just a whole different sensibility. So in ways, I think the contrast there between yourself and what Warhol had been doing a little while earlier is very striking.
I mean, the Warhol films that were most actually influential were these ones like Kiss, and the ones that are more formal. Although I think that Chelsea Girls came out around the same time as Portrait of Jason. But I remember seeing it there was a theater on 42nd Street where you could see some of the longer Warhol films with very little empire, obviously. But Chelsea Girls, another side of Warhol, did influence me. And it happened when I became friends with Undine, an important element in my life was that thing. When I went to Pittsburgh, and then I was told he moved to Pittsburgh, Warhol's from Pittsburgh, and so I said, oh, I'd like to be, so anyway, we became friends, and so stuff like that. So,
we haven't had a chance to speak about your television traveler, which I think is a very intriguing but complex one. But we are going to open it up, I think, just because we have limited time, and I hope some of you might have something in your minds to ask or say.
The human capacity to communicate.
well, a film, my last completed film, I made with Forrest Gray this year, is called A Private Room. One of the meanings of the private room there is that we are each in the private room of ourselves, and that even in the deepest kind of connections, we can't quite, whatever we might think of as the ideal of communicating is not possible. I could talk about it more in the program that has that film in it, but that's also true. What I'm talking about now, about these films and what they might mean, is really not part of the film. It's part of the discussion of the film. Or I try to say that in the book. The book is not really, the book is like a meta film. It's like about the films, but the real films are not captured by that. So I can have like a blank page in the book because the real thing, that would be great if some of you were able to see more of the films and read the book. But as I said, I've made a couple of films later, and I'm thinking now is not as, I think, more advanced than it was when I wrote the book.
But I might say that I think for anyone who knows your work, well, I think I can't put myself in the position of somebody who hasn't seen the films and read the book, but for anybody who knows the work, I think the book is quite illuminating. And actually the way you speak about the work, as well as the personal sides, which, were going on, what things that were happening in your life, that may or may not have directly influenced the films, but it's all, I think, relevant, and I think very artistic. Anyone else?
Thinking about it before, like earlier today, what would I say? What would I think about? What is the actual experience for you of these films? It's really very interesting because everybody's feeling something different, and every time you see it, it's different. But when does thought enter? I mean, I was very influenced early on by Heidegger and phenomenology, and so I was happy I was more happy when the films were seen from the point of view of some of these philosophical things than it was seen in terms of landscape. I had come to terms with landscape. Obviously, I live in the country where the films, not these films, but many of the films of that early period. Yes, harmonica has landscape in the background, but I didn't feel that it was the right place to put these films in the context of landscape.
I think your film Thought, which I looked at just a couple of days ago again, is it's kind of, in a way, an undrum, but it's not really, I think it's very direct and simple, so beautifully crafted and thought out, and really does have a lot to do with thought. And I think it's just, for those of you who may not know, it's just one camera movement across. I guess inside of a room, but it's rather amazing the way that Larry frames the beginning and the way that every movement, is beautifully choreographed as though, you had erected the entire thing in front of you. It's an amazing thing. Anyone else?
I just wanted to say it's the first time I saw blues, and this is how I reacted. I was thinking about eating and like sharing food, just to say what I was thinking. But I wanted to ask you kind of about that process. I keep thinking about the idea of automatic thinking, and like just letting your brain work as you just sit with these films. So I wondered if you have any thoughts on like that concept of automatic writing, or automatic thinking, which I guess is kind of like what most of these films kind of do. But if you have any thoughts on that particularly.
There's something I thought about early, which I definitely didn't plan on. I wasn't thinking about it when I made it, but it had to do with ceremony. And I'm very interested, so that when I got into things, so I was interested in ceremony. I felt in this screening, because I hadn't seen the actual 60mm print of harmonica, but when he's like at the end in this frenzy, it is very much like the drumming thing. So then there's a kind of meditative, but actually the films I feel are anti-meditation. Meditation in the religious content of when it takes place is a technique for freeing your mind of anything in the real world. It's emptying out your mind, and the practice of meditation is to do that. But this is the opposite of that, is to have a kind of attentive focus on what's happening, but that's open. It's open rather than closed. It's full rather than empty.
Anyone else? Anyone else want to share a comment or a question? Okay. Hope you come back to more of the programs. Tomorrow night's Scott McDonald will be here, and it's a number of the early films that period we've been talking about that blues initiated.
It's funny that something I used to tell my students, because now when I go on tour, I'm dealing with more advanced people, and it's interesting. I really like doing that a lot with these master classes, which I hate that term. It comes from music, where the singer or the pianist will be playing something, and then the master comes and says, "This is how you should do it." That's definitely what I want to do with that. But
Okay, well,
I'll think of it later.
tomorrow, Larry will have the Thank you all for coming.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Larry. What a thrill to be here with you. We had a conversation about this evening, and Larry and I decided that we wanted to take a few moments to state that this evening could very much be dedicated to two people whose lives are now over, but they exist in us in so many ways. So we wanted to dedicate this evening to the filmmakers Vincent Grenier and Tomonari Nishikawa, who had died recently, but who were very much part of the avant-garde community of the world, and were teachers like Larry at Binghamton. So before we start, I just wanted to say that. Do you want to say anything? Okay. And I know a lot of you know their films well, and if you don't, please take some time to look them up. But we all miss them greatly. I also wanted to thank a few people, Malka Manul, for organizing this over a period of a number of years, with Francisco Valente here from MoMA here. And also we wanted to thank Forrest Sprague here, who worked on the last film, and we'll be talking about that. I also wanted to thank Carson Parrish, who's the theater manager here at MoMA, and Jenny Bartu, who's our projectionist tonight.
I also want to thank Rebecca Poloff, who worked with me on Entanglement.
Yeah, Rebecca.
Thanking Larry that essentially, at least in these films, you've kind of argued that an artist is something like what Fred Moten, the theorist and cultural thinker, calls a hesitant sociologist. It's a person who tries to figure out how the world works, and more than that, how the world doesn't work. And so I'm going to go through each of the 4 films that we engaged with tonight, and then we'll talk about all of them. But for me, together, they present something like that. I wanted to start with your television, of course, with your television Traveler, which was made over a period of a number of years. And I wanted to ask you about this dynamic between a very, very intimate oral conversation between you, and maybe you don't know this because you haven't really heard that much of Larry's voice, and someone who sees this film might not know that it was the filmmaker, but we in this room might have recognized that voice as Larry's voice. But it's Larry's voice speaking to a Cuban woman in Spanish. So there's half of you who knew what they were saying, and the other half who were actually dealing or engaging with this sound in a very different way, which is the texture, the dynamic between a man and a woman, and you don't have to know what they're saying. And I wanted to ask you about that dynamic as it contrasts or mingles with the images from popular culture, from the investigation of the cosmos by astronauts, and how you came up with that really distinct, let's say, formal dialogue in this film.
Something that I think is true in almost all of my films is acceptance. I love one of the phrases in Mushroom, which I was talking about earlier, when she says, he accepted a bowl of gum. But I sort of have these disparate things, not a lot of them, but disparate things around that I've gathered together. Like sometimes there were things that I found teaching or in other ways. For example, the space footage. I immediately was drawn to the space footage because the circular thing about it was just an echo of the image in blues of the bowl. So I put it away. Somebody sent me some films that he found that were being thrown out by a TV station in Florida. So he sent it to me, and I gave most of them to my students to use to cut up and play with. But I kept the one about this Television Traveler, which was some kind of program. I don't know if another one existed, but about the turpentine thing in Florida, and then it switches over to this Americana family. So those were separate things, and then I began to think of some way of getting them together. The films that I showed last night in the Dominican Republic and in Haiti, especially in the Dominican Republic, people were very open. They wanted to be on the film. They wanted to connect. They wanted to look in the camera and be that way. And so I felt that kind of rapport with them and comfort. When I went to Cuba, where Machete Gelée was shown at the Havana Film Festival, I was totally inhibited about filming anything there. I don't know why. There was something about the people that made me not thinking, here I am, I don't know what I'm going to be doing. I met this woman, and somehow I learned about her. The voice that we hear is her brother, talking about her life and her sad life. And it occurred to me to talk to her about it. And then somehow the idea of relating this intimate story, sad story, with this cosmic space footage and the view of the Earth from space, to put them together. Then, of course, this, I love vinyl records, and at the period when DVD, CD started to take over, some people who were into vinyls, you gotta grab up whatever you can get. So I used to look in old junk stores and antique stores and flea markets for records. And I found this record set about the space program. And then there was this absurdity of these astronauts identifying with this comic racist character of Jose Jimenez. I mean, the idea in the United States at that time that the idea of a Hispanic person being an astronaut was hilarious. I mean, it was so far from what they could imagine. So anyway, that stuck with me, and I started to put it together like that.
Well, I gotta admit, I didn't know who Jose Jimenez was, but of course the television traveler that I am, the person who travels through, now we call it navigating or through the internet, allowed me to discover Jose Jimenez, and it was really disturbing.
Yes.
And I was really grateful to you for doing this critique in the film of that beloved but imaginary Latin man.
There are also a lot in this film and in some other films of people. When people appear in my films, they usually have a lot more about them than you can easily see right away. And many of them are what I call in the book avatars of me. And there's some positive ones, images like, for example, the guy who's playing the harmonica, who represents a kind of youthful spirit that I wish I was, but I'm not. And then there are characters like the television traveler who are negative ones. That's what I would always hate when I was making these films in other countries and so on. Would I be seen as somebody just, presenting the world in that way? I didn't want to be like that. So they had positive and negative identification. And even within the film, the strange thing about the Jose Jimenez figure is that the astronaut actually so identified with it that when he thought he was dying, all he could think of was Jose Jimenez. And so that idea extends, as we'll see in the other films that we're going to talk about, and in many of my films, there's something like that. So you can even the figure of the boy that's in the cover of my book, people think it's me, but it's not. It's a boy in this children's documentary film about the seasons.
I found that so moving that you're able to articulate this sense that every film has an avatar of you, but it's not always a hero at all. So you have to exist in both persona, and that you recognize your own failings within each film. That's really interesting and very bare.
There will also be your avatars within the film, so that there's astronaut and the Jose Jimenez figure, and they're ambivalent. I like things that are very ambivalent, as we could talk about in the other films.
And then I wanted to talk about Not, great title. And in Not, there's something that you do that takes me to a lot of your earlier work, which is very formally disciplined. So you really play with horizontal time. You go A-B, so the horizontal time in which there are straight cuts, and then you have what you might call vertical cuts, so superimpositions, with one thing is on top of another in the B and D. So you have A, C, straight cuts, B, D, superimpositions. And then within that film, you're referring to music and the structure of music and the discipline of music, but then you're showing images in which there's so much failing, there's so much disaster. So there's just this really rigorous formal and content-based weaves going on in Not. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, an important thing is when I had all this Haitian voodoo-related material, it took me almost 25 years, actually, to know how to deal with it. And I didn't make anything, I didn't shoot anything during that period. And then somehow I was able to finish that film, and then I had this burst of energy which I'm still living under.
Yay!
I didn't like filming with this little digital camera that I had with this little flap. You know, it seemed so stupid. It didn't have the weight that the camera had. So since then, I've been preferring to use so-called found footage material that I get on YouTube a lot. So almost all of the film that has to do with the conductor, Furtwängler, was himself a very complex figure. He was one of the really great conductors, and conductors have always been important to me. I mean, my early training was in music, and I was in orchestras, and Toscanini, who appears briefly as the sort of opposite of Furtwängler, was my sort of high school hero, and I had a lot of his records and so on. But Furtwängler continued to work and conduct in Germany under the Nazi period, and so it's ambiguous. I mean, he claimed he was not allowed to travel after the war, and then eventually he was not forgiven, but he was allowed to travel and continue his conducting. The idea of a conductor has been very important to me. It goes back to my connection with the director, Nick Ray. I mean, it's funny because they use the term here, like I'll say, fog line, directed by Larry Gottheim. I mean, the director is somebody that is my opposite. I mean, the director is somebody who has this control over, as the conductor of an orchestra has that kind of control. And Toscanini, as appears in my film, Animosity, Mother of Muses, screams. I mean, he's both this great musician, and yet he's a tyrant. And I compare him with my father and so on, so that most of the material, all of the material in World War II is from a TV documentary about Furtwängler.
As I was watching the film, I was thinking about that conductor who would raise his hand, and then we would cut the film. So I was experiencing you as the avatar, but that it wasn't about music, it was about pushing us forward. But sometimes it was just the synapse between one image and the next. Again, a reflection on this editing process, but of course, if you weren't here, we wouldn't know this came out of your frustration with the camera. And that's what's like really special to have you here. We get this sense of the chronology of your practice.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much packed into that film. Also, some of the things that are not from the documentary on Furtlander, right near where I now live. And my early films happened to be where I was living at the time, outside the countryside, outside of Binghamton, New York. Now I'm living in Yonkers in an apartment house, but I walk down the street and I see in the crevice in the wall a stencil of a girl who's writing something on the wall, which is crossed out. And what she's writing is Les Enfants Terribles, which happens to be the name of a play, I think, a film by Jean Cocteau, whose influence I was thinking about tonight, watching some of this, so that there's that material is accepted into the film to bring together this thing of this stencil on the wall and the conductor. And then not only is it about music, but it's a lot about painting. And one of my favorite things, this repeated phrase about yellow is interesting, and the colors of it. I didn't realize, I don't know how it happens, because you can superimpose images in the digital realm, and they always retain the same color as in the original material. But somehow in this thing, and by the way, Christian Flynn, whom I was working with, is not here. He's working in Berlin as the trio of people that I've worked with in these films. But somehow when it gets superimposed, it comes up with this amazing color that you never expect. And so I was working with that a lot. But the conductor idea comes out in the next films, certainly true, because the idea of the train conductor and the electricity conduction goes into that film.
I really felt in those sections where you had the superpositions that you were referring to something about harmonics,
Yes.
that things were resonating because of the merger, the convergence of all of those things together. Again, a reference to music.
It's also, I should say that one of the elements in MoMA is a musical work by a dear friend of mine, Lynne, and her thing is about multiplication. She's saying in 4 different languages, English, Catalan, Spanish, etc. But it's about 1 times 1, 2 times 2, whatever. And so there's a kind of questioning always in my films lately, starting with, I suppose, Tree of Knowledge, about what is knowledge, and thinking that the explanation, like in that film, of what causes the seasons, even though it's correct, I do believe that it's true, it's also hiding something that's the real truth that we can't know. So that in the film, with all this counting and multiplying, is questioning the very nature of counting. And that's what I think drew me towards quantum mechanics, because in quantum mechanics, things which we know from normal living can't be true turn out to be true, or if not, we don't know what true means anymore. But you can work with it without really understanding it, and nobody understands it. For example, does the past exist? Yes, it does. Time can go backwards. and so on. I mean, there's a lot of things that seem to be impossible is uncovered as more deeply possible, or what it means for something to be possible. I mean, people can use quantum mechanics and other physical things without really knowing what they mean. And actually, the thing that interests me is how does a physicist who's working in a certain area talk about it, put it into English instead of in mathematical symbols. And in doing it, it becomes really ridiculous in a certain way. I mean, so I began to find, to get into the next films, that everybody, all these scientists, when they're talking about entanglement, which is an important basic idea in quantum mechanics, they start talking about, let's call this particle A and this particle B, and then they say, and let's call A Alice and particle B Bob. And then they start talking about them like real people. So I wanted to carry that to a really extreme of something being really ludicrous, because
I thought it was romantic.
well, they are both in the film, they get married and it's romantic, but also they can't talk to each other.
Yeah, well then that leads us to entanglement and a private room, because A and B can't talk to each other even though they have that ring. I was absolutely fascinated by both of those films and by this idea that through entanglement there is an interconnectedness but between particles which seem very disparate. But let's move away from the word particle and move to cinema. And I think in these four films which use found images which seem to be unrelated, you are discovering an entanglement between them, and that is in you, that is in your being. And we wouldn't be able to fathom that if we didn't have your touch, but also your past, your history, your relationship to music, your frustration with the sort of difficulties you see, the pain you see in society. All of that is brought together through your kind of confrontation with the quantum physics. And actually admitting you don't know quantum physics, but you're applying it to cinema.
It's interesting that the word, I mean, a lot, I'm interested in language also, words, and that in the film Entanglement, entanglement in the physical way is a very close bond between these two particles, so much so that something happens in this one, and it's affecting something that's happening in the other one with no time passing instantly. But in the opera, they're talking about getting tangled means it gets destroyed, things get tangled. So tangled itself means both things. It means this mysterious kind of unity between different things, as well as what gets in the way of that. It's destructive.
I wanted to ask you about one very specific series of images, the images of the women in the Wagner opera with the rope, and they refer to it in a very, I think it's Wagner, and they refer to the rope in very specific ways. They're cognizant of it, its transcendence, and also as an object between them. But then you cut to kind of the group of people, it looks like going through some carceral situation where they're being punished and their heads are down like that. Could you talk about those images?
Yes, those are from the first atrocity of the Russians in Ukraine was at this town called Bukha, and those are people from Bukha who are being led to their death. And it's very complicated because there's something sort of beautiful about it in this grotesque way. The way that they're moving is, and it's reflected in this puddle. There's something strangely beautiful about it, even though it's quite horrible. And there's something like that in Not Not. There's several things that refer to. Okay, there's one thing of this line, and I'm drawn to. Obviously, this whole program is called the Red Thread, and that is a metaphor that's very, very complicated and exists in mythology and in many, many cultures. But one of the things is the thread that runs through all of my work. I'm interested in lines and fog line. The line is as important as the fog, and lines and ropes and threads and so on are important images for me throughout all of my work. So that in there's this line, which it turns out, just like the thing with Bukha, it turns out that these are the students in Berlin who are burning the books, so that the fire is of the books in the university. It was interesting that it just happened. I realized after it all been set up, but the premiere of Not Not was in Berlin. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to take it. But actually, to the Germans, those images of the burning books was familiar. And, we take it for granted that we are all not Nazi supporters or whatever. But unfortunately, in this country, there are a lot of people who are. How to deal with that. So I don't want these films to be lectures on politics or history or physics or anything. They really are works of cinema above all. And so, again, as I was saying, the other thing is that what you're thinking of or what you're experiencing, and it's not even thinking necessarily, but what is going through your mind as you're experiencing these films. That's what the film is. So it's a different film for everybody, and a different film if you see it again. And that talking about the film makes it more what I'm against, actually. The films are not lessons or discourse like that. It's almost like an excuse for me to do things that are, to me, so beautiful and so I don't know if the word is beautiful, but they're cinematically wonderful. And I want all my films to be like that. And there are films by other people that I feel are like that. There are also many films by other really great filmmakers that I really admire, but their films don't have that quality. I can go into that.
Well, that actually leads us to hearing from your audience. And how various people here would interpret the films. But I wanted to say that sitting here does remind me of being in a classroom with you. And not because you're teaching me, but because you are laying bare your process. And it was such a gift to be in a classroom with you. And to celebrate all the time that we spent together for one semester in the mid-'80s. And I mean, how incredible it is to think that that is in me. It's not just your films, it's also the films that you loved and shared with your students. How many people here were students of Larry's?
One of the things I've been doing lately is doing these so-called master classes. Now that itself is a very ambiguous idea. And in the film Entanglement, Courtauld, who's a great pianist, is giving a master class. And it sort of makes sense in music, I think, where the student pianist will play something and then the person, the master, I don't like that term, it's like conductor or director or whatever. It's not, but in this case, he pushes her aside and then he launches into this thing about how you should read. This is how you should play it. And there are master classes with singers very often where, anyway, the teacher, and I feel this dedication, I feel that I'm finally the kind of teacher that I would want. I mean, whatever I did.
Congratulations.
As a teacher, there was something that I wasn't able to transmit. I wasn't able to give. And maybe now I have more self-confidence or whatever. So I feel that doing these things in relation to another filmmaker is very fulfilling in me, and it seems to be appreciated by them. And I'm also touched by keeping up with so many of my students. It's great, but I feel that I'm giving you more now.
We would love to hear from former students and not former students. Do some of you have questions or observations?
That film, I noticed you used a lot of footage from other films. And were you also thinking about like your own life's entanglement or like how to untangle it or?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot. One of the things that happened at the end of MoMA was that Christian, it ends with a shot of a conductor, and he has his back to the audience and he goes down. And Christian said, well, that's a really appropriate thing because this is your last film. And I thought, okay, it's my last film. And then I felt stuff surging up in me, and it keeps going.
That was 2019.
Then I thought, okay, Entanglement is my last film. Okay, so A Private Room is my last film. So I know that I'm not going to be living forever, but I'm full of energy. So I have another thing in mind. Teaching is very complicated. My parents were teachers, but I'm a very different thing. I always, a lot of my films are about my father, and of course, father is another figure like director and master and conductor or whatever. But my father wasn't like that. My father was more laid back. And so that issue about passivity in my early films often encountered. Like, for example, the great filmmaker that I love, Stan Brakhage, but he is the master, the director, and he makes you know that his work is a reflect. He is the dog star man, and so that ambiguity has always been important to me, working my way through that.
Larry, something you repeat in your book a few times, but you never really go into is that you say that you're afraid of snakes. And I just wonder, especially since these films were being, the one you saw, the last three that we saw tonight were being made pretty much soon after you wrote that book. How do you relate snakes to entanglement, and what do you think? Why are you so scared of snakes?
Well, it's funny that I'm interested in that thing of being afraid. Like, what I found was when I was, let's say, in the Dominican Republic or in Haiti, I was in a lot of really serious and dangerous situations, and I think people have that sometimes, like war correspondence. You feel elated, not elated, but you get a high of being in danger. So I was completely fearless in situations but sometimes when the telephone rings, I'm very anxious about answering the phone. And sometimes I put it where if I have to call somebody, I'm like, probably have nervousness in my voice or whatever. So I'm interested in that in myself, of this dynamic between afraid and not afraid.
It's really a beautiful lesson that we can all reckon with our degrees of fear. Of the snake that travels wherever we go. Other questions?
The light is, can you see everybody?
Oh, that's Greg Bierman who's going to ask a question.
Yeah, there was a recent New York Times article about literalism in Hollywood movies, and your films seem to be moving in the opposite direction. I mean, I guess they always have, been things that depend on association and logic or something like that. But these films, in some ways, they have these gutsy choices of subject matter in a situation where you're free to associate, and dealing with the swastika or dealing with fried chicken or dealing with, these charged things. In some ways they're kind of dangerous in our current situation. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about those things.
Yeah, it's interesting. Something that I was very, very thrilled about was, it was during COVID, so I couldn't go to it, but I suppose I had been at this Korean film festival, and then there's this Taiwan International Documentary Film Festival, and what was the thrill was that the emblem of this festival was the image from Blues, of this bowl of blueberries, and it was it was even on the tickets and on the program and on the poster and everything. And this was a documentary film festival, but that interests me because at the end of my teaching, I could make up whatever courses I wanted. I had a lot of courses about dealing with anthropological documentary films, or even any kind of documentary films, and I was interested in undercutting and showing or feeling that they were hiding or concealing or going away from the truth. And what is true? I don't know, but I feel that things in my films they exist in a certain special realm where they're not reality, where they are more real and reality. Because we learn, that's what I was thinking of when I'm getting into my new film project, is what happens when we go to school, or even before we go to school, when we're born, and people go over to the crib, they give us certain kind of toys, and then they have like educational toys, and things, and clothing, and the room, whatever. Sorry, talking to myself. Anyway, it's preparing. We're being prepared to be the people that we have become. And then what I feel is that something seriously has gone wrong. I mean, the world today, something has gone wrong all over the world, whether it's with the environment or wars or whatever, personal relationships. I mean, it's, in some way it's horrible. And how did it happen that all of this training, I'm talking about America, where we have the toys and the dolls and the TV programs and so on. But in other cultures, they have their own form of that, of developing people from these infants that are born. Where does it go wrong? And I feel that I have to sort of undercut it and in a way criticize or examine in a way that it doesn't want to be examined.
I think that's one of the reasons that these films are so liberating. You're asking us to think in new ways, let's say about wearing masks or about violence or about, about gender actually. There's a lot that you do to play with gender. You show this all female orchestra, but you don't try to instruct us to feel any certain way about it.
I was really challenged. I mean, in several of the films, there was something that started me off. And I happen to remember this thing when I was a kid. There was this Phyllis Vitelli all-girl orchestra, really. And so I started to find these things on YouTube, and it's totally ridiculous. I mean, it couldn't be more ridiculous in every single way. And so I said, I'm going to make a film that will have that. And also in a private room, there was this song by this 1930s singer. Also, I just said, I want to work with this in the film. But what happens in Entanglement is that when later on the woman starts singing about there'll be no more dreaming, and the other women are behind, it becomes somehow beautiful. I mean, out of this totally obscenely stupid thing.
I felt there was so much pathos even the third time we heard from her. In fact, that particular clip, I'll call it, taught me about the way you use repetition. So every time we circle, we return, it's not repetition, it's growth.
That's right. I know, that was important. I mean, it was a kind of bold idea. I mean, repetition has been featured in a lot of my work, and it's very important. I can't explain everything about it, but it's so very important. The only thing that changes is the images of me with the telephone are different in the repeat. Everything else is exactly the same.
That in itself, going back to that question about being in filmmaking, that's daring. Because people will take the word repetition and they'll say repetitive, but I think you construct something that is always expanding with each return.
Yeah, I think it even implies that you can return more and more, and there will always be something new.
Yeah. We'll take one more question. Well, I'll just ask if I would actually do a little survey because these films are constructed in such meticulous and complex ways, and because Larry uses repetition, so we have the ability to hold on to an image or not. We have the ability to grasp it and run away with it and walk out of the theater with it. And I was wondering if you all could kind of spontaneously tell Larry which image might be with you tomorrow morning when you wake up. Like if there's an image that will stick with you, not necessarily because it repeated, but because it landed today. And tomorrow you might see these films. I've now seen them all a few times. And each time I watch them, different images are etched on my eyelids. So I was wondering if you all could just share with us an image that you, maybe starting from this side to this side, but if you could tell us. Yes, from the very back row.
The red blotches in front of the singing women. There was these little circular red spots that appeared in front of their faces.
Thank you. We're going to hear a few, and then I want you to comment.
Me too. I feel strongly about that image. That is the one that's the kind of emblem of this whole series.
Thank you for mentioning that. Do you want to say? I'm sorry. Do you want to say anything more about the red blotches?
No.
Okay. Yes, from the back.
The pianist agreed in the master class.
The pianist and what fantastic. Cortot, is that his name?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, he's bossy and he's also very sensitive. Yeah, other images that really just stay with you or might stay with you.
The squeaking of the train chassis.
So all, yeah.
A sonic thing rather than an image.
Yeah, thank you for, I actually should have said that though, because the soundtrack is so rich in all of them, and especially this theater, right, Larry?
It's great here. I mean, this is, as I said, I mean, this is a chance of a lifetime to be sitting in front and seeing this big image, and the sound is quite amazing. It's really important.
Any others that can, yeah?
The capsule, or I don't know what you call it, the spaceship.
Oh, the spaceship from the very first film. Yeah, your time traveler. Yeah, we were in it. Yes.
I was going to say the image of the prisoners going to their death, unfortunately, just because of the times.
Yeah, yeah. I thought that was older. I didn't realize it was so recent. Anything else? Yes.
Conductor's hand, and that hand gesture that you keep coming back to, I think, in
The conductor's
not
hand.
yeah.
Yeah, and now we know how important conductors are to you. Yeah. Anything else? Yes.
Larry's image, where am I? Saying Larry's image,
Oh,
saying
yeah.
where am I?
Where am I? Yeah, that's unusual, but most people don't want to admit that we all feel that way.
But I mean that in many different ways. I mean, if you just think about it, just think about it.
Actually, that's a really good place where we're all. Oh wait, did you have something to say? An image? I don't want to. Yes, two more people who want. Yes.
The watch, the Mickey Mouse watch.
Well, I have a question. Did it change time?
No, I don't think so. It's the same.
10 and 2.
It wasn't like the clock upstairs.
But it is amazing. I mean, what seems to happen is that when you think of something for some reason, and then it starts to give off many more things. So when I originally was thinking about that, I wasn't realizing, as now I realize, that he's like the conductor. Oh, he's like the conductor, you know, in the hand gesture. And then it so happens that in the film, from which I took the stuff from the central section of a private room. In the beginning, the Claude Rains character is kind of by trickery, is because they have people in the audience who are set up so that he seems to be like a mind reader, but in fact, but anyway, it's a watch that she holds up.
I wanted to ask Forrest, do you have anything you want to say about you and Larry working together?
It's like synergy.
Wait just a minute, we have a microphone.
Oh. It's like synergy.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's all I gotta say. It's like synergy.
Okay. Thank you everybody for being with us this evening.